And Matt, from your point of view on the web, right, the greatest attribute of the web is everything's free, or just about, Rupert Murdoch has his way. That will no longer be the case. For the time being, everything's free. How do you respond to this idea that traditional media, the crisis of traditional media, do you see it as an opportunity? Do you see them as having missed the boat? Or do you see it as there's room for sort of old media and new media?
I actually think it's an opportunity, because it's funny, I saw State of Play earlier this year, and I think the scene that stuck with most people is, the newspapers are going through, and it feels it's sort of bittersweet. But another thing I took away from that movie was that each side can help each other out. Online journalism that started online has a lot to learn from print. As far as movie websites like Collider, I still hear stories. I'm not based in LA, but I know the primary writers of the other sites, and it still feels like the Wild West, where people will act unethically. It's more about who can have the most traffic and ask questions later. And I think print has a professionalism that can be lacking in my field, and there are other people who don't understand the professionalism yet. That being said, I think that print has a lot to learn from online, both from the speed of the web as well as how people want their information and how fast, which is, I think, a primary benefit. A lot of our stories, if you were to print them on a daily basis, they would be old news, but we're giving you these quick updates as fast as possible because we're receiving them fast. Earlier today, on his Twitter page, Jon Favreau, director of Iron Man 2, says, he pretty much said, we're going to see the first trailer for that movie attached to Sherlock Holmes. Now, I don't know how fast print could just get on that news, and I think the people that read our site are really excited to read that news. I'm sure they follow Jon Favreau as well, but maybe they haven't checked his Twitter page, or maybe they're just not on Twitter, but I still think it's interesting news. So I think the hard-earned professionalism of print and the speed and efficiency of the web can combine to create something that's really going to satisfy readers.
Something Karina Longworth brought up in a panel I'd seen around a little while ago. She wrote for Spout, which apparently is running into the same problems some print publications are running into. She was on a panel, and she's become sort of the spokesperson of the industry about web versus print. Something she said really changed my view of the way print journalists versus web journalists work. And she said that the print journalists are actually held to different constraints. It's not even different standards, but if you're writing about a film and you're writing for print, you actually have a fixed number of inches, right? They actually talk about inches. Whereas online, if you want to ruminate for 5,000, 10,000, 100,000 words, you can do it. And you actually have an audience that's curious. So in many ways, while the perception is the web is instant and short and all these bytes, it has the value also of a place where you can actually go deeper into analysis, whereas a lot of people have thought, well, magazines and print will survive being commentary about the news, the way Newsweek has just made this leap. Instead of breaking news and reporting on it, they're doing commentary. But her suggestion is that, in fact, more serious journalism can take place on a web story because there's more space. You're not constrained by cutting down your number of inches in order to meet the amount of space you have on the newspaper and making room for the ads.
I think that's more true for reviews than it is for other types of journalism. Because in reviews, you tend to be more constrained than you are in other sections of a magazine or newspaper. So your reviews do get cut short, you can't go into depth. I think the web is great for that. But in terms of a feature, it's really hard to slog through a 11,000 word essay online. And for that's where print excels, is when a nice in-depth story, big full-page photos. And I think particularly, we do this at our magazine, I think a lot of publications are learning this, they're really two different beasts. And you can have the same writers, but we do a lot of news online. We don't do it in print because, like you said, it's old news by the time it gets in print. So we just don't even try in print. So each medium sort of has its strong points, and you have to play to that when you're writing for it.
Well, I would actually, in some ways, disagree, simply because I would say that the trouble in writing features isn't necessarily because of pictures or the constraints, but rather time, in that we are trying to be so fast that finding that time for a feature and the time to report on it and make sure it's accurate, unless you have a large staff, or that's really more what you're devoted to are those larger features rather than instant news, it's difficult to find the time. Now, that being said, there are writers out there who create these very well thought out editorials and do some very fascinating reporting. Earlier this year, there was a great story about how Terminator Salvation just developed over time and how it came to be the film that it was. And that's not just a quick news story. Now, granted, you could say that it was built from smaller stories, but by bringing it all together, I think you got something that would be just as well put into a feature in a magazine. So I don't think they're necessarily exclusive, and I also don't really think that they're in competition with each other. I think maybe financially they are, but again, I don't think that one is trying to destroy the other, and I see them maybe more able to help each other than competing.
Where do you work? I know Pace has an office, so how many people are in the office, and tell us about that, versus Collider, which I'm imagining may or may not have offices, but I always envision online publications as a network of people on a computer who maybe get together from time to time.
Well, we have 16 people in the office, plus freelancers who are actually physically in the office. Not freelancers, interns who are physically in the office with us. And then we have a network of freelancers. And boy, these days I don't even know what the split is between in-house versus freelancers, but let's, 50-50. So we get a lot of writing from people who are just writing from their home or second jobs or just for fun. And then a lot of it takes place actually in the office.
It is from home, mostly. I have a laptop and I like to go out, but I really like working from home. I've worked in offices, and it's not for me. And I like the ability to sort of set my own hours. Now, that doesn't mean I just leave the site all day. That's bad, because it's really just me and the editor-in-chief, Steve Weintraub. But he lives in LA, and so he's handling interviews and junkets and set visits, and he's really good at that because he's really good at getting interviews and exclusives, whereas I handle the day-to-day news feed. But it's just that we talk on the phone all the time, because I'm rarely in LA. He would have no need to come to Atlanta in terms of, although he might actually have more need because of the Georgia tax incentives. He was here for when they were filming Zombieland. So that's sort of how we work, and then we have some other writers, and it's all from home, and that saves us on overhead. And our other writers who are willing to do a news story here and there, and DVD reviewers who will write a review just for the DVD, that all saves us money, but we get content from it, because the people who are just writing news, they want it for their portfolio, which is what I wanted when I first started. And the people who write DVD reviews, they like movies, and they like not paying for a DVD. So, and seeing it early, they'll get the review copy early.